"16-year-old Damien Nettles went missing on a cold, rainy night on November 2nd, 1996, in a town called Cowes, on the Isle of Wight, an island just off the southern coast of England. His movements were well documented by CCTV footage up to midnight on November 2nd. That night, Damien had gone to a party with a friend. Later that evening, he and his friend left the party early and headed over to West Cowes, having bought some cider to drink. They wandered the streets for a few hours before parting company sometime around 10:30 p.m. Damien was last seen on High Street in Cowes just after midnight. When Damien didn't come home on the morning of November 3rd, his family reported him missing. Damien missing was out of character and wasn't taken seriously by the police initially. They said he probably ran off just like boys do. The case, as of 2017, has been labeled cold despite Damien's family continuing to search for him. His mother, Valerie Nettles, whom I spoke to for this episode, vows to never give up in the search for her eldest son. There are rumors that foul play may be involved in Damien's disappearance. After a local drug dealer died in 2002, rumors circulated that he may have been responsible. In 2011, Hampshire Police made 8 arrests for conspiracy to murder, but after an extensive bail period, all suspects were released without charge. When police made the arrest, Damien's case was elevated to a suspected murder. The police searched one property and later reverted the case back to a missing person status. Until new evidence comes forward, police are unwilling to conduct further searches. Valerie, Damien's mother, says the police have been exceedingly hard to deal with and decline to get involved or assist with any searches by the public on the family's behalf, or participate in a BBC documentary which aired in 2016. If you know anything about Damien's disappearance, please contact Hampshire Police on 101, quoting Operation Ridgewood. If you prefer to remain anonymous, contact Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. Also, please check out damiennettles.uk, the website, and the Facebook group Justice for Damien Nettles. Valerie is also on Twitter at ValNettles1. I've linked to all of these in the description. Valerie has also written a heart-wrenching book about her experience titled The Boy Who Disappeared, which you can find on Amazon. The episode starts with Valerie talking about her current frustrations dealing with the police, and then we backtrack to get the whole story around Damien's disappearance. Here's my interview with Valerie.
Right. Well, I think the more the merrier, the more I get it out there that, that we're not going away, basically, and that we're not giving up, and that there's, it's a strange word to use, which is hope. But the hope is for some kind of a resolution. No closure, because there'll never be closure. There'll just be more questions. But really, we just want some kind of resolution. We want to know what happened to him. We want him back. We want to give him a burial, and we want him in a place where we can pay our respects to him. I've never realised quite so much how important that is for us to have that, burial process where that person, what happened to them and where they are, where you can go put flowers and where you can just go chat, if you wanted to. And I just want that right now. And I feel like there's information been held back on the island. There's been a lot of fear to come forward and to actually talk. They will not talk to the police. People won't, they come to me and then they won't say, they say, well, I won't talk to the police, but I'll talk to you. And the information that keeps coming forward is a variation on the same theme, which could be Chinese whispers. I suppose that's a politically incorrect way of putting it these days. But it's just, I feel that there's an element of truth to all of the chatter on the island. And I think there is a definite fear. So I have to wonder why there's a fear of, people talk about this in hushed tones. And so, I just want to make sure that, we don't go away. We're not going away. I still feel there's something to be done for Damien here, and he deserves better than he's had so far in terms of, the scrutiny that his case should have got. And so we just keep plugging it away and hoping that at some point somebody will listen and grow a conscience and tell us, what they know. The unfortunate thing is that the police don't seem to be taking... Well, I wouldn't know, because, Damien's case is now a cold case. I have a cold case officer. And basically, we were supposed to have a review. We've been having a review the last few years. It's been a cold case in June. And I got a new cold case officer last year. And I can't get any response. I've been trying since April, asking when we're going to have a review, and getting absolutely no response. None. Nothing. It's like I don't exist. It's like I'm just being ghosted. I really don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to talk to. I've tried in the past talking to other cold case officers who say, well, we don't know anything about it. You have to wait until Stuart comes back off his holiday or whatever, if he's away. But I'm not getting any bounce back emails saying I'm out of the office or I'm on vacation. So I'm assuming he's still there. But I wouldn't know because I get no response. So I'm just between a rock and a hard place. It's very frustrating. It's exhausting. And I just need someone to tell me, whether or not they're looking into some of the information that has come my way over the past year and a half, where people have said, well, I wanted to get this off my chest. I did say, I saw this, I heard this. There's a couple of really sort of quite reasonable things that have come forward, that I thought, well, that might be made up. You don't know, but it sounds plausible, and I think the police should know about it, because who else am I going to tell? If this person said they were in a room and they heard this conversation but didn't say anything at the time because they're scared of the repercussions to themselves or their family, but now they moved away, and this particular person had stage 4 cancer and she wanted to clear her conscience before she died. And it sounded plausible, and so I passed all of that on this last, 6 to 8 months ago. And, well, it would have been maybe not quite that long ago. I spoke to him in April, but anyway, I passed on the information several months ago, put it that way, and I still haven't heard whether or not they looked into it, whether they considered it, or if they kicked it out. And I just need to know. I'm sat here hanging on by a thread, wondering if any of this had any validity. And, this person's dying of stage 4 cancer, so time's limited here. So it's very frustrating. This is how we've been on and off over 26 years of Damien's case, is waiting and waiting and waiting and having to push and niggle and ask. And it's been very, very, very tiring. But it's just, we're not alone, because there are other people that I know now who, have children or family members missing, that have gone through very similar experiences. And it's not just the UK police, it's also people I know who live over here, because I live in the States now. And it's it seems to be almost a universal thing where people have this, a frustration with not getting timely information, but other people have a great experience. So I mean, I don't know how. I guess it's just the luck of the draw who's on the case. So that's pretty much where I am right now. Anyway, it's just trying to plug away and see if we can't, at least keep Damien's story current, that we're not going away, and that we still feel that there's some loose ends there that still haven't completely gone away in my mind.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I want to get back to some of those loose ends. If you don't mind, I want to go back to the beginning a little bit, and I'll apologize because I'm sure you've talked about this so many times, and I know the information's online, but I think it's important for the listener to hear it from you, because sometimes information will get online that's not entirely accurate. But I'm wondering, what can you tell me for sure that's relevant and important about what we know about the night that Damien went missing, and I'm wondering if you can maybe end that with, how you found out and kind of what that was like and what happened from there.
So, well, Damien he was in Cowes High School, and he was doing, he's just moved to another school on the island to do his A-levels. He'd gone to Carisbrooke High, but he had been a student at Cowes High School for 4 years, and then he had gone and changed schools to do his A-levels. And so he'd gone to Carisbrooke High School, where he had met some kids that, he didn't really know very well, and he'd managed to settle in pretty well. But he was out with his friends, like it was half term at the end of October. It was half term in the UK. So over the summer, he had made a girlfriend, and he wanted to go and visit her. So he'd gone up to Suffolk to see this girl, Gemma. And we had driven him up there, which is, fair way. But he had stayed with her grandparents, and then he caught the train back to come home. But he stopped at the Portsmouth University, where his sister was actually just beginning her as a student at Portsmouth University, and it was on its way, because you have to go to Portsmouth to get a ferry back to the Isle of Wight. So that's what he did. He stayed a night there, and that would be the Friday night, and he came back on Saturday. And on the Saturday, that's the 2nd of November, we went shopping. We went with his younger brother, James, my husband and I. We took them to Newport, and Damien had a certificate from school for doing well on his GCSEs, so he wanted to go and buy some stuff, and he needed some school trousers for school, which was starting on Monday. And so we bought him some, new school trousers, and while he was in the shop, he bought a book on guitars and some guitar strings with the gift certificate that he had got for doing well on his GCSEs. And so Ed, my husband, and James and Damien, they went home in the car. I went to get my hair done, and it was a spur of the moment thing. I hadn't really planned on going, but I popped in and they could take me. So I got the bus home, and so when I got home, Damien was ready to pretty much go out for the evening. And he said he hadn't seen his friends over half term, so he wanted to go and see Christopher, his friend Christopher, and go and see, who's doing what sort of thing. And Christopher's younger brother was only 14, and some of his friends, 2 girls, were having a bit of a party. Well, they said a party. It wasn't really a party. It was just a gathering of, teenagers. And there was just Damien, Christopher, Davy, and these 2 little girls that were 14. So, I mean, it wasn't like a party at all. And Damien and Christopher got bored, and they left. And they went back over to Cowes, and they have to catch a little boat to go back over the water there. There's usually a foot ferry, a car ferry that you can drive onto, and it takes you across the mouth of the river from the East Cowes side to the West Cowes side. But that night, the floating bridge basically was out of commission because they have an annual where they bring it in and fix it up and make it nice again. And so they had just a little launch that they caught this launch back over to the west side, and they walked up into town and bumped into people, which we find out in hindsight that they had seen, people had bumped into them. Because, you've got to remember, this is a tiny little island on the south coast of England, and it's probably maybe 30 miles by 22 miles in size, and I don't know what the population is, but it's a small island, so it's off the south coast of the UK. So Damien and Christopher, they had walked back up to Cowes, and literally it's 5 minutes from where the boat was into the high street, and they were seen by several people, which we find this out, in hindsight, and they were hanging out, and they drank cider. We know that they had bought some cider, he and Christopher, and it was a particularly strong cider called White Lightning, which is very well known in the UK. And they had been drinking cider, so I guess they were a little worse for wear. And people said they remember seeing them both, and that Damien didn't seem, unusual, particularly. Some people said he seemed like he was a little drunk, which I wouldn't be at all surprised if he'd been having cider. And so they were just hanging out on the high street on a Saturday night. And then it got to be at about 10:30, which we find this out later. Christopher said, and we've only got Christopher's word that this is what happened, because there was no one else there to say anything, that he said that they left. They started to walk out of town like they were going to go back home, which was literally 2 minutes up this road. And Damien said, I'm going to go back and see if my sister's there. And Sarah, who was at Portsmouth University, when, he had gone to see her on that Friday, had said, I might come back at the weekend. Well, she hadn't come back when he left the house at 7:30. My husband had dropped Damien off at Christopher's at 7:30ish. And so she wasn't home, and she had only said, I might, come home. So anyway, he'd got to be in his bonnet, evidently, that Sarah was maybe in town somewhere. And so he went around trying to get into some pubs, and got turned away a couple of times. And so he was seen at around 11, I think it was about 11:30 or 11:40. He'd gone into a chip shop on the high street that happened to have a security camera inside the shop, which we discovered later. And he seems a little worse for wear, but he wasn't actually staggering, falling down drunk. He was a little wobbly. Obviously didn't have much change on him, and he was ordering chips. So he gets the chips, and he gives the guy some change and leaves. But during the time that he's in the chip shop, there was a group of men, older men, that were talking to him, and they were not local. And it took quite a long time for us to find out, or for the police to actually find out who these guys were. And the two that they found were actually army officers that were training sailing on the island that weekend. And they said that they didn't know who the other men in the chip shop were, even though they all conversed. And Damien stood in the midst of them, talking to them. And then they leave, and Damien served, and then he leaves. And we know that he walks out of the store and walks a little bit further up the high street, because After this all happened, I asked the police if we could look at the street CCTV camera, and they were a little bit reluctant, but finally they did let us see that, and we did look at that until we saw Damien show up on the CCTV cameras. But prior to that, they'd had an officer looking at the CCTV film footage. And when we got there, it was held at the town council offices at the marina where they had their bank of video cameras. And we went to look at that, and they had been tracking the wrong person. It wasn't Damien. So we had to sit there and watch their films until we saw Damien, and he showed up. And that was just after he left the chip shop, because he's walking along eating chips, and he's caught underneath the camera. And he doesn't look worried about anything. He's just walking along eating his chips, and these are stills. The cameras are, it's not like a video or anything. And they were a bit grainy, but it's definitely Damien. And then we find out from people that Damien had turned around and gone back up to the bus stop and was stood there sharing his chips, which, if anyone doesn't know what chips are in the UK, they're French fries. And he he was eating that and sharing them with people at the bus stop. But then he did something which is odd. He got on the bus and said he wanted to go to Cowes, and the bus driver said, "You're in Cowes, mate." And so Damien got off the bus and stood there. And somebody witnessed that he was sat on the steps of the store. And then he came over to this man who was sat in his car and said, "They're watching us, mate." And which is an odd thing to say, but I know that there was a heavy police presence on the high street that night, because the police had told me that they had a soccer game from a team that had come across from the mainland, and they had a heavy police presence because they wanted to make sure that everybody caught that last boat and that there were no fights or anything like that. So I'm wondering if, Damien knew that there were police there, because the man that had told me this got a ticket 2 minutes after he left and drove back off to go home. He said that he got stopped by the police for running a red light, a temporary traffic light that was there. There was some construction going on. And yet, when my son went missing, it just is odd to me that if there was a heavy police presence there, surely the police would have noticed this boy wandering around. It's the kind of place where, once the pub's shut, it's November, there's nobody on the high street. There's nobody that, it cleared out pretty quick. I watched that video of the high street, and it cleared out pretty quick. There was nobody on the high street really except Damien that we could see. Maybe another couple. We saw a young couple walking, but there was hardly anybody on the high street at that time. So that was just after midnight that we saw Damien under the camera, and then he's never seen again by anybody that's been verified. So it's hard to know. I had been told that Damien had, been shouting and calling up to there's a flat over a butcher's shop where there were some young men that lived there, and some local drug dealers were up there, and they were doing whatever they do. And Damien had been shouting like a silly 16-year-old that he probably was being, throw me some drugs or something like that, or just drawing attention to the fact that there's this group of people in that flat or apartment overlooking the high street, and he was just generally being a nuisance to them. And I've heard that somebody that was there taught him a lesson, and I've had various accounts, and I've got the Operation Ridgewood redacted report where somebody describes that his head was kicked like a soccer ball. And so I do wonder if Damien didn't just get up somebody's nose, if you will, just annoyed somebody that night, and they took it out on him and went too far. There's another person said that he saw these guys held a youth up against the wall and were punching him. And several people come forward to say these things, and I just have to wonder if there isn't some truth to all of that, since there's so much come forth about it over the years, and that somebody taught him a lesson and it went wrong. And I'm sure it wasn't done deliberately, or pre-planned sort of thing, but if you kick somebody in the head like it's a football, you're going to do some damage. And so I have a lot of these visions in my head of things that people have said over the years. Other people have said he was killed, cut up and fed to pigs. Well, I have to live with those visions of things that people have said that happened to Damien. And I have to wonder if there isn't some grain of truth. I have so much information that's been given to me and that the police have looked at, and there's some things that they looked at that I don't think that they could actually hand on heart say it wasn't true. They had arrested, it was 14 years later that they arrested some people and held them on bail for over 18 months. Some of them they let go sooner. And they took one of them to the Crown Prosecution Service, but they said there wasn't enough there to charge this person. But by then it was like 14 years too late. All of this should have been done within the first few years. They should have been. I mean, when I reported Damien missing to the police, they just said, all boys of that age do this. He's just gone off for a funny 5 minutes. He'll be home by tea time. And I'm still waiting. He's not come home. And it was out of character. It's not even like something that he would have just done anyway, just not shown up, or not come home, or not called us. He had plans what he was going to do on the Sunday, plans on what he was going to do on Monday. And he wouldn't do that. It just is out of character. It doesn't sit right that he would have just decided to leave and go. He could have done it while he was away in, the week before. He'd gone up to Suffolk, which is, several hours drive away and a boat ride away from the island, and he could have stayed where he was up there if he didn't want to come home. And he didn't. He came home. He came home and he waved bye-bye. He said, "Okay, Mum, see you later." And I said, "Come home and be home by 10:30. And he said, "Oh, can't I stay out a bit later? I haven't seen my friends all week, because he'd been away in Suffolk." He said, "I'd like to see my friends." I said, "Well, then don't be home later than 12. And if you need a ride, give us a call." And like I say, it was 15 minutes walking distance from the town to where we lived. So it wasn't a long walk. And Ed was quite prepared to go pick him up if he needed a ride. Of course, we didn't have cell phones in those days, so he would have had to go to a phone box and call us, but he had done on many occasions. Or if he'd gone to a friend's house and he was staying the night, he would usually call us. If it was very late, he'd call us first thing in the morning and say, "I'm at Chris's house." And that's really what we thought had happened when we found out on the Sunday that he wasn't in his bed. I thought, oh, well, he must have stayed at Christopher's then. And, he'll be calling us in a minute. And because it was a Sunday, we just didn't want to start waking people up. And we left it till about, I guess, 9:30, 10 o'clock. And then called Christopher's house, and Christopher said, no, I thought he'd gone home, because we started to walk home, and then he doubled back to go into town to look for his sister, Sarah. So everything that we know, all of that is all what we've heard from other people. Obviously, Damien's not here. He can't tell us what happened. You know, we only have other people's accounts, and the police seem to discount most of them.
Sorry, I was just I wanted to ask one thing before I forget, just that you mentioned there. It's going back to those arrests that were made several years later. Were those arrests linked at all to any of the men that were allegedly, that people had said maybe harmed Damien that night? Like, but were they the same people that he was shouting at? Like, do you know if there's any link there, or who these men were that were arrested?
Yes, that's the link right there. The people that were in the flat that night that Damien was calling up to, one was, two of them were young guys, probably more like my daughter Sarah is a few years older than Damien. So they would have been at school around the same time that she was. In fact, I know who they are. I mean, they're not friends of Sarah's, but she knows who they are. They were definitely at school. So they were a few years older than Damien. But he would have known, it's a very small town. Everybody knows everybody. And they were in this flat, but with them was a thug, basically. He's an older guy. He had kids around the same age as my children. I didn't know who he was back then. I had no idea who he was. I didn't know he existed, but I've come to find out over the years, who he is. Well, then he passed away in 2002 from a drug overdose. He was a drug dealer. He was a small-time thug. He and his associates were well known. Their record precedes them. For anything, that I know about them, there's a long list of things. I've got news cuttings from the local paper that go back donkey's years, with these people having done, antisocial behaviour, theft, drugs, beating people up, just bad behaviour, just not nice people. And that was the person who was up there in that flat with the two boys. I say boys, young men, that apparently he was fuming, is the word that I've had told me. He was fuming at Damien for attracting attention to the fact that they were up there and the kind of things that they were actually doing, which was drugs. And apparently I was reading the police report, and the two boys had girls up there as well. I've not heard from any of those girls that were there. Never come forward and said, oh, well, we either saw Damien or we didn't see Damien. And it was a long time, really, before the police even took those statements from those two boys. And one of the boys, I know, from local knowledge, people have told me that one of them, he is in and out of prison like a revolving door and on drugs, and the other one is also, in trouble on drugs. So and they're not the kind of people that Damien knew. None of Damien's friends were that way. They were all kids. They were in school. They were still in high school. They didn't. I'm not saying they didn't do any drugs. I'm quite sure that they did pot. In fact, once I found Damien had a little bit of pot on him at one point. So I know that obviously I'd be stupid to not think that, that they would try that. But nothing stronger than pot that we're aware of. There's no one can tell me, oh, I was with Damien and he did anything stronger than that, because there's no one that's ever told me that. So the pot I know, and if it was like cider, I'm not surprised, that he probably got himself into drinking a bit of cider and smoking a bit of pot, but nothing harder than that. He didn't have the money to, carry on a drug life. I mean, he just didn't have that kind of money. We didn't have that kind of money to give him pocket money to go and blow on that sort of thing. So that's highly unlikely. And that's the boy that I know. The boy that I know was not, as far as I'm aware, into anything maybe more than pot. And we found it on him the one time. Read him the riot act, told him not to do that again. We didn't approve, and of course he was very embarrassed. And we thought, well, that's a lesson learned. But Damien, I have no doubt whatsoever. With if he got another chance to maybe got offered some pot, he might have had some pot. So, and to me, it could have been a lot worse than pot. So. If it was just pot that he did, then it's a lot worse. Not a lot, there's a lot worse he could have done. Can't be too judgmental on that, and I don't know for sure how much pot he ever smoked. I'm just assuming that that he must have done it at some point. I mean, it'd be stupid as 16-year-old. They're curious, and if it's there, they'll probably have a go.
Nothing ever came of those arrests? Like, they weren't able to link anything to Damien's disappearance? It sounds like they tried, but just couldn't, like you said, it had been too long and they couldn't prosecute. Is that kind of what happened?
Pretty much. They had, like I say, they had a total of 8 people were arrested in the very beginning. I think 6 of them were kept on bail over a period of 18 months where they had to answer bail. And then, they fell off here and there. They just let this, they I don't know what you call it, when they stop the bail and they say, well, we're not going to charge you with anything, you can go. No further, there's a saying, no further something or other, prosecute them, basically. But there was this one guy who evidently had said stuff in front of people that he had participated in Damien getting throttled, and so I don't know if that was braggadocious, just getting drunk and telling people that he had something to do with it, or if he was just in his cups and he was telling the truth. But that's all I know is what I've heard people say, that he's done this. And I mean, I didn't hear him say it, obviously, but I just, it was interesting enough to the police to eventually take notice of what had been told them. One of these drug dealers in town, his ex was a police informant at one point, and also she was on drugs. But she remembered seeing the guys bringing in something in a sail bag. She was lying on the couch at the time. She was pregnant and had to be on bed rest, so she was on the sofa. And these guys brought in something rolled up in a sail bag. And if you know, like when you go sailing, they roll up the sail and they put it in a big canvas bag. So they brought this stuff in. She thought it was stolen goods, and then she found out later, she was told that it was Damien's body. So I keep getting all of these snippets of information. The police took her seriously. They listened to what she said, and then they discounted everything that she said. They finally turned around and said that she was a liar and she'd made it all up. Well, the thing is, she was a police informant for years. So you would think that she wasn't a liar if they paid her all those years to be a police informant. Who knows what agendas people have. but she was very, very definite. I actually spoke to the woman on the phone, and she was a little all over the place, but her story didn't falter. And so, we brought this back to the police, and that's when they decided to, off the back of that information, they would make these arrests. And I don't know if it was just a grand gesture to look like they had finally done something on Damien's case after all these years, and then they put it to rest, or if it was, that they did a search. They did an underwater search. There were some ponds in near Newport on the Isle of Wight. There was a quarry, some kind of a quarry there, and some sort of ponds around this quarry. And so the police divers went down there. There was some, talk that maybe, he'd been thrown in this pond, or they were looking for something there. And I don't know. It's a lot of information, and I'm afraid I'm going all over the place here, but it's a lot of information, and basically at the end of the day, it's a quantity of information that really didn't get scrutinized until 14 years after he went missing, which is absolutely unconscionable. It was, well, I was relieved at the time that they were doing it, that I felt that there was some hope that maybe we'll get some answers here. But like I say, the last man standing went to the Crown Prosecution Service, and apparently they said there wasn't enough there to do anything. And he was pursued by the reporters during that documentary. And he's, oh boy, that Damien Nettles has ruined my life. And I'm thinking, how could a 16-year-old high school student have ruined your life when, you were a known drug dealer, a known crook, a known, ruffian that's been in trouble all your life, and my son disappears and it's ruined your life. And that was what he said in that series when she finally caught up to him, and he wouldn't talk to her. He was just like, boo-hoo, poor me. And like I say, he's the one that had bragged, apparently, to people that he knew what happened to Damien and that he had something to do with it. And it all goes back to that night where I say that they were seen, that group of guys were seen around town from information that we've got. It's a little sketchy. But I do know when Damien went missing, the officer that came to visit the house after we reported him missing and finally had a detective show up, he said, yes, there was a report around 1 o'clock in the morning behind the Royal Yacht Squadron, which is a very posh elite sailing club on the Isle of Wight in Cowes. There were voices raised like a fight. There was shouting and raised voices. And the police were called. And I have no idea if the police attended to that call, but he said, yeah, it was in the middle of the night. And I got the impression nobody showed up or nobody went to check it out, because he said, yeah, it was a bit sketchy. It's probably got nothing to do with anything. But then when years later I heard that there'd been this altercation in the street, and that Damien apparently had been held up against a wall, or a youth had been held up against a wall, and his head was kicked like a soccer ball at some point. I'm thinking, well, who knows? Maybe there's some truth to this. I'm just left here with this weight of all of this information, not knowing if all of that's true, but with these visuals of my son being kicked to death, chopped up and fed to pigs. Someone else said that he was chopped up and put in a lobster basket and fed to the fish. It's atrocious. And here I am trying to get some kind of response from the police now. Like, are we going to have an annual review? And I can't get any response. I don't know where to go with it. I don't know where to go with all of this, and it's I just still hope that at some point somebody's going to show us where Damien's buried, and then we can actually lay him to rest. And whether or not these people will ever get their just desserts, I don't know, because a couple of these individuals have since passed away. One to a drug overdose that we know of for sure, which was a very suspicious death. Another one, a couple of others have hung themselves. It's just hard to know if we're ever going to get to the bottom of this ever in my lifetime. I'm 71 now, and I don't feel like, we're ever going to get anything anytime soon, but I keep hoping. So I do these. I put out the publicity, and I'm hoping that at some point we will get some answers. I mean, it's like I say, there's a wealth of information, and trying to put it together in a synopsis is very difficult.
Is that why you wrote the book? Like, I was curious about that. Like, there is a lot of information. Was that your way of putting everything together and piecing it together so there's some sort of documentation, or what was the motivation behind writing The Boy Who Disappeared?
Well, I've always written, and when that's my expressive thing. Some people paint, some people sing, play music, and I've always felt that I need to write it down. So I have, over the years, written several things, and finally we pieced it all together and made a manuscript and submitted it to the publisher, and they said yes, we'll go with that. And so I had to tidy it up and change a few things and put it in some sort of better format, and I was given some help with that to publish the book. But the reason I did it was because there had been so much misinformation over the years as well that I felt, as his mum, I needed to say what my story is, what I know. I'm his mum. I know this boy. I know this story as best as I can tell you. This is what happened, and I put my side, because over the years, I mean, the publicity, you get one thing slightly skewed, like they didn't quite get it right, and it becomes a part of the history. Mistakes. When people have said things or done or written articles or whatnot, and suddenly that mistake becomes something that becomes the fabric of the story. And I'm just like annoyed, that people don't actually come and ask me before they go print something. And then you can't take it back. Once it's on the internet, once it's out there, it's gone. So I just wanted to write my side of the story. The boy that I know, my son, he went out one night, this silly Billy Damien. Out he goes with his friends on a Saturday night and vanished into thin air. And all the police could tell me was, oh, boys do this at that age all the time. He'll be back by tea time. Just go home, make a cup of tea. And then when I called up later in the evening, just asked them, I said, because I went down there about 3:30, 4 o'clock, something like that, and went home. And then I called around 7, I guess 7:30, and asked them if they'd seen or heard anything yet. And I called them twice. And they said, well, quite frankly, Mrs. Nettles, you're not doing yourself or your son any favours. Keep calling us up when we should be out working on his case. And I'm his mother. I am so scared right now. It's blowing a hoolie outside. It's a storm, and it's raining, and I think he might be lying out there somewhere hurt or worse. And you see, my initial thought when Damien went missing, it was never any of this story that came around. I thought he had fallen hurt himself, had an accident, like, he was waiting to be found. That was my only thought, that someone needs to get out there and look, because he might be lying out there with a broken leg somewhere. That's all I thought. And then slowly but surely, over the years, we start getting this trail of information coming our way that paints this other picture, and it's corroborated because, obviously, Damien had been calling up and annoying people, and so, yeah, you can corroborate some of it, because you can say, yes, he was there and he did say this, and they were drinking cider and they were at the chip shop, but I just needed to actually put my stamp on Damien's being missing. As his mum, I know the boy. I know what happened as to the best of my ability, and the kind of boy he was, and I didn't want him tarred with just people saying, oh, well, he was probably into drugs, because I don't think he was, other than, like I say, maybe the pot, and maybe cider, that sort of thing. He wasn't an angel. I've no doubt whatsoever. If he had an opportunity to smoke pot or drink cider or anything, beer or something, he might do that. But he was 16. He was doing his A-levels. He hadn't quit school, so he was doing his A-levels. He had a desire to go to university, and he was a sweet and kind, gentle, sensitive, funny, loving. He had us in stitches most of the time. He was so funny. He was just a lovely boy, just a lovely boy. And I didn't like the way he was being portrayed in all of this, that he had some sort of dealings with drug dealers. Those people were not in his life that I ever knew of until this sort of came about, that he had antagonized somebody and they had taught him a lesson. And I could see that, because when Damien was being silly, I could see that he'd get up somebody's nose and they'd be trying to teach him a lesson, because he could be quite silly and annoying, but not really in an ugly way, just in a silly Billy boy.
People listening to this, what can the public or anyone do to help? What do you need to happen to find out, ultimately the truth? I mean, is it someone, ultimately giving some more information? What can the public do to help you?
I'm not really quite sure. I suppose pressure on the police to, I think Damien's case should not be a cold case anymore. I don't think it should ever have been a cold case. There's even been rumours that the police turned a blind eye to some of the things that were going on in Cowes at the time. Some of these people that I mentioned have been grasses, or I guess informants. And so they turn a blind eye to what they do. I don't know any of that for sure, but this is what people have told me. And so I think if I would want to pressure the police to put Damien's case back to as it was, a suspected murder, because when they did this arrest business, they made Damien's case a suspected murder, which is, I think, where his case should be, not a cold case. There's still too many, like I said, too many questions, too many loose ends. But the police just don't seem to want to pursue it. I'm not getting any response from them about the things people are coming forward, even now, with information. And like I say, it's been since April. I've not had a word since April from the cold case officer. I can't seem to get a response. And don't know. I don't know where you go with that. I don't know.
I think that's like abhorrent that they won't even return your messages. Like that's horrible.
And the thing is, Damien's half American. His dad's an American, and I'm British, and we're still together. We've been together now, married 40 odd years. And when Damien went missing, my husband went to the American Embassy in London, and they said there was nothing they could do because, it happened on British soil. And we were resident in the UK at the time, so it was down to the British police. So we never had anything like the FBI or anybody like that looking into it. And of course, now it's so old. This case is so old. I don't think anybody would look at it. But I feel like, at the time, back in the day, we should have had something like the FBI because, they probably would have been more, what's the word? Neutral, I suppose. But yeah, I've asked for Damien's case to be reviewed by an independent police department. Like it's with a Hampshire Constabulary in the UK is where this case is held. And so I've done 2 official complaints, and every time they end up reviewing themselves, investigating themselves. This is the way it works here. The Independent Police Commission that you IPCC, I think they might have renamed themselves now. And then you make a complaint. The police department you're complaining about does the review of themselves. So it doesn't make any sense to me. I wanted an independent police body, like even have the London Met, take the case over and go back over it and review it to see if Hampshire Constabulary did a good job or not. And they didn't. They admit it. I mean, I've got it written here in they gave me a heavily redacted Operation Ridgewood report, which is, considering this is like they gave it to me in 2017, it's only got 57 pages. 57 pages for all those years. It's not very much that they've done. But in there, they actually admit that they still don't know what happened to Damien. He could have fallen. There's no evidence to show that he fell in the water or he was murdered. We've received information in relation to him being a victim of a crime or a murder. These lines of inquiries have never revealed any evidence to suggest that this was the case. But they didn't look for so many years. And some of the people named by then were dead. It's like, up against a brick wall here. But yeah, they admit in here that, that in the early days of this case, things could have been done better, which doesn't help me at all. This is my child. This is not, a dry run. This is the only run I've got. This is it. This was the moment when I reported Damien missing for them to actually buckle down, get out there, and start rattling some cages and looking for him and not telling me to go home and don't bother them, sort of thing. And he'll be home later, because all that age do this. Even though I kept telling them, pleading with them, it's out of character. This is out of character. This is not like him. They need to listen to parents, and when you say it's out of character and it's wrong, there's something wrong, you need to listen and not pretend like they know more than you do about your own child.
If you know anything about Damien's disappearance, please contact Hampshire Police on 101, quoting Operation Ridgewood. If you prefer to remain anonymous, contact Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. Again, I urge you to check out damiennettles.uk, the website, and the Facebook group called Justice for Damien Nettles. Valerie is also on Twitter at ValNettles1. Again, I've linked to all of these in the description. Please check out Valerie's book, The Boy Who Disappeared. It is a gut-wrenching story about the search for her son. You can find it on Amazon. If you enjoyed this episode and want to show appreciation, you can buy me a coffee at the link in the description. If you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, you can head to the Patreon. For $5 a month, you get ad and sponsor-free episodes and early access to all new episodes of the podcast. If you don't want to spend any money, but you want to support the podcast, consider leaving me a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Also, you can find the Missing and Unexplained podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening to the Missing and Unexplained podcast.